And so I'll be putting to him a number of questions tonight, and then we'll turn to the questions from the audience. So let me begin, Mr. Ambassador, with the very first question that this television reporter asked me, and that is, in our global effort against terrorism, against this al-Qaeda-inspired jihadist enterprise, in your view, from your perspective, are we winning or losing?
Brian, you started by talking of baseball, and anybody who follows baseball knows that a baseball season can be somewhat exhausting. You think you've done very well, your team's done very well, and then all of a sudden you have a string of games that swings it the other way. And then, of course, there's the whole question of who makes it to the playoffs. So in that context, I think that this is a long season. The positives are there has been no major attack in the United States since 9/11, that we are able to find out about more planned attacks ahead of their execution than we were able to do in the past. Most important, that Al-Qaeda is losing the veneer of support that it had created in the Muslim world. 10 years ago, people used to say, well, actually certain enemies of Islam are using the terrorism argument basically to denigrate Islam. Terrorism is not just about Islam. And by the way, it isn't. Let's be honest. The IRA practiced terrorism and they were not Muslim. The LTTE, the Liberation Tigers of Tamil Eelam, who invented suicide bombing in Sri Lanka, were not Muslim. The Baader-Meinhof and the Red Brigades in Europe weren't Muslim. So that point did have a validity. But people were, among Muslims, there were relatively fewer people who were willing to acknowledge the centrality of the threat of global terrorism as manifested by Al-Qaeda and its associated groups. And there were all these arguments about, well, part of it has to do with the injustice that is being meted out to us, etc., etc. And so for year after year after year, in opinion polling in the Muslim world, it seemed that there was significant respectability or residual respectability for Al-Qaeda. Well, today, the latest Pew poll from 9 leading Muslim countries has come out showing for the first time that those who think that Al-Qaeda has done any good, their numbers are way down. No longer more than half of the population. In 1 or 2 countries, barely a quarter, and in many, further erosion. So that whole Osama bin Laden as a modern-day Che Guevara or something like that is no longer valid. And that is definitely a victory. More important than that, I think that the willingness of educated, intelligent Muslims to become recruits for terrorist causes is also way down. That said, the games that we still have to play, to continue to use the extended baseball metaphor, we still have to make sure that recruitment comes to an end or comes down to a trickle, that training networks and setups in various parts of the world are totally smashed, and that there are no countries in the world where the failure of the state or the weakness of governance enables Al-Qaeda and its allies to create safe havens. We are not there yet. The ability of jihadist terrorists to hook up with international criminal networks is still there, although it is not as strong as it used to be. So it's a mixed picture. And here I'm going to say something because I have an American audience and I never miss an opportunity to talk to my American friends. As somebody who loves this country, is very enamored of it historically, who in fact has often challenged Americans in a game of Trivial Pursuit on American history and won, who tells very proudly that I'm Americophile, which is a term not commonly used. You hear about Anglophiles and you hear about Francophiles, This country has a lot of things going for it. It's a nation based on the idea of life, liberty, and pursuit of happiness, on the notion of the rights of man. It's a nation with the first written constitution in the world, with tremendous tolerance, and to overcome its own intolerance and to undo its own injustices from the past. Those are the strengths. But here's the problem. Americans don't do patience too well. And the war against terrorism, or the effort to eliminate or undo terrorist networks around the world, is basically something that requires tremendous patience. So if people in this country are going to be like my kids when we used to go out on road trips, are we there yet? After every mile or so, no, we are not there yet. But is there enough gas in the tank? Do we have the stamina? Do we have the ability? And do we really know the road? Yes, we do, and we are a long way ahead from where we started 9 years ago.
I had mentioned previously that the alliance is sometimes difficult. The United States expects the government of Pakistan to do a great deal in cooperating militarily, in going after Taliban and Al-Qaeda elements within Pakistan itself, not realizing the political realities in Pakistan, and not realizing that at the end of the day, that often involves Pakistanis killing other Pakistanis. If the Pakistan government goes too far, they risk alienating their own population. If they don't go far enough, they are publicly rebuked by the United States, who says they're not doing enough, which only makes it appear as if Pakistan is engaged in this contest solely at the bidding of the Americans, which is, of course, the line put forth by our terrorist foes. This past year, President Zardari and the government of Pakistan has launched a major military campaign against the Taliban in Pakistan, with a measure of success thus far, and now coming up to a very critical point in that campaign. And yet at the same time, as some of the polls from Pakistan indicate, there may be somewhat declining support on the part of the Pakistani public for its continuation. Could you comment on the future of that effort? Will the Pakistan government be able to sustain that? And how will it unfold?
Well, first of all, let me just dispense with the question about opinion polls first. The good thing about democracy is that it's the elections that matter and not the polls in between. So we had an election last year. The people of Pakistan elected a government, and President Zardari was elected with a clear mandate, and he has a mandate for 5 years. And he's making very difficult decisions and tough choices, which he believes are good for Pakistan, which many of us believe are good for Pakistan. And once they show results, popular support will rebound. All of us who are in the government are absolutely certain that these day-to-day polls need not be the real reason why we should make decisions. We need to fight terrorism because the terrorists are wrong, not because some opinion poll tells us that we should fight them, because with due respect, opinion polls can vary, and people's responses in opinion polls can be about something totally unconnected. You can be upset about one thing and you can be saying no over another. The real problem in the US-Pakistan relationship is history. Now, I know another thing in the United States is that Americans, don't do patience well, and they don't do history too well either. The general attitude in this country is when you want to be dismissive about someone, you say, Jack, he's history. So that kind of is a dismissive attitude. Pakistanis, on the other hand, the other day I met someone who was very proudly telling me how his family has lived on the same piece of land for 900 years. So you can imagine the different cultural dimension here. So the history of the US-Pakistan relationship has been somewhat turbulent Because Pakistan and the United States became allies way back in the 1950s in the Cold War against the communists. Then we were allies against the Soviet invasion of Afghanistan, and now we are allies in the war against global terrorists. But at the same time, Pakistan has disputes and issues in the region with some of our neighbors. We want to resolve those disputes, and we will. But the US attitude towards that has been, that's your problem, that's not important to us, you do for our... And so what that has done over the years is it has created a mindset in Pakistan that the US is a fickle ally. They came here, they armed our people, they trained thousands of people to go into Afghanistan and fight the communists, and then when the Soviets left Afghanistan, the US walked away. Now, I don't know how many people, and by the way, I'm not in the business of promoting movies, but I know it's an easy way to connect, so that's why I'm mentioning it. Are there people in this audience who've seen the movie Charlie Wilson's War? Well, you remember that movie. In that, there's weapons going in, and boy, people are sitting in Washington. And by the way, I was around for that war. I covered it as a journalist, and then later on, towards the tail end, when the negotiating process started about the post-war, I was an official, and I was in Washington. I know the whole story. Everybody used to be very glad when we were counting the number of Soviet planes downed, etc., 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 number of Soviets killed, Soviet troops embarrassed. The Soviet Union was defeated. Now, we understand that the US-Soviet competition was global, and this was one theater of war. But for us, it was the theater where our boys fought. It was where our young men laid their lives. There were Pakistani volunteers who fought alongside the Afghans. And the United States, at that moment, turned around and said, okay, war won, and thank you very much. Leaving thousands of people there, including people like Osama bin Laden, armed, trained, with lots of money at their disposal, looking for new battles to fight. Some of our leaders at that time made some wrong decisions about what should be done about these people. That part is our responsibility. We'll take responsibility for that. But the US needs to take responsibility for the fact that its walking away at that time created a deep-rooted fear among Pakistanis that whenever we are in alliance with the United States, we have to start worrying about their walking out. And so that has made one segment of our population wary. Then, of course, there are those who are sympathetic to the Islamists. And then the third is that after the Cold War, the United States stopped investing in trying to win over hearts and minds around the world. I myself, for example, learned about the United States by going in the afternoons, and hot afternoons in Karachi, to an American library that the American government provided for. Now, how much do you think it costs to manage a library in Karachi? Not much. The books there used to be actually books that were secondhand from your libraries. But for us kids there, poor kids, it was a great way of learning about your country. There used to be TV shows and radio, etc. Well, after the Cold War, wise people in Washington, D.C. decided they wanted budgetary cuts, and the easiest place to cut budgets was because, after all, foreign countries don't vote in American elections, so it's more important to keep the subsidies here alive. And it's more important to sort of bail out companies here than it is to keep friends abroad. And in the process, in the entire greater Middle East, from Morocco all the way to Pakistan, there was nobody speaking up for the US. Nobody explaining American point of view. And so the third dimension to it is that we have a lot of people who are speaking against the US. There's a propaganda machine of the Taliban and Al-Qaeda and their associates, and nobody's speaking up for the US. That makes it difficult for a government that wants to fight terrorism for Pakistan's sake, not for America's sake. We want to fight it for Pakistan's sake, but with America's help. It's very easy for people to label us as being American stooges or lackeys. And that has been the difficulty. So the India-Pakistan dimension, the baggage of history, and the inability of our leadership until recently to rally public support. There too, in the last 14 months, the Zardari government has had tremendous success. In July, now having said that opinion polls don't matter, so I'm going to use the privilege of the speaker to be able to use contradictory arguments. And I'm going to cite a public opinion poll. In July last year, Public opinion polls in Pakistan showed that only 33% of Pakistanis thought fighting the Taliban was the first priority for Pakistan. This July, it went up to 83%. Now, are the people of Pakistan all saying, yay, United States, and we are for it? No, that hasn't happened. There's approval ratings for the US are still down. But disapproval ratings of the Taliban and Al-Qaeda have now reached a point where it's easier for us to rally our people and fight, which is why the Swat military operation was as successful as it was. And if we can keep that momentum, but that momentum depends partly on American actions. If the United States can keep on demonstrating its willingness that we care about Pakistan as well. We are not going to use your country just to go and bomb whoever we consider the enemy and then leave the wreckage behind and come back to the safety of our land, which is protected by 2 oceans anyway. Then I think more Pakistanis will be willing to pursue this war with greater vigor, and I am confident that we will be able to take it to other parts. And if a similar operation can happen in Afghanistan, we can have the hammer and anvil in which we can actually make life for the Taliban and Al-Qaeda pretty miserable.
We have the ambassador and I have agreed that I can throw a couple of fastballs. So here's a fastball. A number of our officials have referred to Pakistan as the most dangerous place on the planet. And that is because of the confluence of terrorism, political instability, territorial disputes, a history of wars and military confrontations between Pakistan and India, and the presence of nuclear weapons. The nuclear issue is of particular concern to the American public and American officials. Americans worry about the security of those nuclear weapons, whether or not they might possibly be seized or come into the hands of terrorists. They worry about the possibility of the Pakistan government itself or elements within that government somehow taking control of those weapons. They worry about those nuclear weapons being used in a nuclear war between India and Pakistan. They worry about Pakistan's role in disseminating knowledge of nuclear weapons in the past to other countries. Can you reassure Americans about the nuclear issue in Pakistan?
Look, I'm smart enough, I think, to understand that Americans aren't going to be reassured by anything I say. They will be more reassured by things that their own government says. So I'm just going to quote Secretary of Defense Robert Gates from his statement of only 3 days ago, that the United States now, this is the operative word, he says the United States now has a very high degree of confidence in the security of Pakistan's nuclear arsenal, and that the United States and Pakistan understand each other in this respect now. Answering the bigger question about the most dangerous place and all that. Look, having started out as a journalist, I know the life of a headline writer. So, you have to come with a nice headline sometimes. And so if you look back, I don't know if there's a sort of some graduate student in the audience who wants to take this up as a project. Great topic for dissertation in communication, especially how many places have been called the most dangerous place at different times in the last 50 years. It's a headline writer's issue. Has Pakistan had elements of instability? Absolutely. 170, possibly 180 million people, rising population, relatively new country, with a dispute with its eastern neighbor, unresolved conflicts in the region, predominantly Muslim at a time when Americans were being a little bit wary about whether the Muslim world is stable inherently or not. Not a consistent democracy, military intervention in politics every few years, coups d'etat, etc. So, and then, 3 wars with India in a span of 62 years. So that earned us that label. But we are overcoming all of that. This time, we have had, and not only had an election, we actually impeached the military dictator and made him resign rather than force him out through another coup d'etat. In the past, that had never been done. That's a sign of moving forward, stability. Second, we elected somebody who in the past had been accused of all kinds of things, but we elected him with an absolute majority of our electoral college. Third, even though his opinion poll approval ratings have fallen, the country is not, nobody is saying out with the government. The government is continuing, which again is a sign of stability. Fourth, in our international relations, the United States and Pakistan are working on a number of issues simultaneously and very methodically. And fifth, despite the Mumbai tragedy of the terrorist attacks in Mumbai, India and Pakistan have not given up on their peace process, and Pakistan and India are now working harder towards trying to overcome their difficulties. So, are we in Shangri-La? No. But are we making progress? Absolutely. Remember, a lot of the instability in the greater Middle East comes from the fact that stability has always revolved around individuals and not around systems. It's all about the Shah will keep Iran safe for America, or so-and-so, or the house of so-and-so, or such and such ruling family. Pakistan is now a democracy with great consensus within society of Pakistan, and with a democratic system. Will we occasionally have incompetent people in office? All democracies do. Will we? And we will sometimes end up electing great people like Governor Ritter. So you will, it's a mix. Sometimes there will be people whom we will not. Sometimes we will have strong people and great people. That is the strength of democracy. Pakistan now has 48 24/7 news channels. Now, I know that some people will get worried about the future of Pakistan, those who worry about the future of this country based on what goes on 24/7 television, cable news television. But it's a good thing, it's diversity. We are debating issues in our country, including nuclear issues. So the secrecy of the past that enabled one individual to trade in some secrets with third countries, that is gone. We now have parliamentary oversight. We now have media oversight. We now have a measure of stability in our own domestic politics. And of course, there will be occasions when it will still not appear all hunky-dory, but we will move forward. We are moving forward. And I think that another year of democracy, you will hear the same people who used to describe Pakistan as the most dangerous place as saying the most dangerous place is now becoming relatively more stable, and it will over 2 or 3 stages until they move and find another country to be the most dangerous place in their headlines.
Let's move to another dangerous country in the headlines at the moment, and call upon your skills as a seasoned observer of the entire region. There's great concern in this country and indeed throughout the world about the course of events in Iran, in particular Iran's nuclear program. As a comparatively new nuclear power yourself with nuclear weapons, what would be your advice to the United States, to the world, in dealing with the very difficult challenge we face with the possible determination of Iran to acquire nuclear weapons?
Now, Brian, I'm somewhat handicapped by the fact that I'm ambassador of Pakistan to the United States, and there's an unwritten rule that ambassadors do not speak about third countries. So Iran being a third country, it's not appropriate for me. I can speak about US relations with Pakistan and Pakistani relations with US. It's inappropriate for me to comment on Iran, but on nuclear proliferation in general, I'm going to say just this. The nuclear non-proliferation regime in the world was crafted at a time when there were 5 nuclear weapons powers: Soviet Union, United States, Britain, France, and China. And so the whole regime presupposed that no other country will acquire nuclear weapons and will not be allowed to. 3 countries did not sign the non-proliferation treaty: Pakistan, India, and Israel. We didn't sign it. And all 3 of us had the same argument. Our argument was that the nature of nuclear weapons is such that if there has to be non-proliferation, it has to be global. everybody has to at least engage in the process of doing away with nuclear weapons. And so, here's what I would say to my friends in the United States. Go back to trying and creating a global non-proliferation regime. If you're only going to be selective, that A can have them, B cannot, and that certain countries, nuclear weapons are safe in the hands of certain countries and governments, even though my country has them, and our government is now one of those that is being considered as being relatively safe and less dangerous. My point is a bigger point, that we need to treat nuclear proliferation as a global priority. It's time to start focusing on making sure that there are no new nuclear weapons powers, and that the old ones also start working on arrangements which will bring the nuclear threat in the world down, rather than being, otherwise, look, it's going to be one country or another. It's like putting out fires all the time. And nuclear weapons, if they continue to be, there are people in Pakistan who say, you know what, Hussein, they say to me, don't think you're important in the United States because you are some smart ambassador or something. You're important there because you represent a nuclear weapons power. If we didn't have nuclear weapons, the Americans wouldn't pay attention to Pakistan. You don't want that attitude around the world. If every country starts thinking that the way to get attention and the way to get international prestige is by acquiring nuclear weapons, then you have a problem. I think we need to deal with nuclear weapons as a problem in totality on a global basis and rework the nuclear non-proliferation regime in a manner in which it takes into account the changes that have taken place since the 1960s when the regime was originally worked out.
Very good.